I just gave a buddy a bunch of my favorite Marvel graphic novels. He asked for some recommendations. He said, I want to stay away from the list. What do you think the best Marvel books are? And it got me thinking about what are the top 10 graphic novels that I really couldn't ever see myself selling. And I'm going to be honest, it was hard narrowing it down into just 10, but I had to be really honest with myself. What are the books that I constantly go back and continue to read? So let's kick it off here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below. My challenge to you is, what are 3 graphic novels in your collection that you would never be able to get rid of? We're going to begin here with Punisher. Welcome back, Frank. I'm sure most Punisher fans out there hold the Garth Ennis ones to a higher regard. It was darker, it was more DC-esque, the art was pretty next level, and this story is the Punisher that we probably all understand him as today. Completely unrelated, I actually think the current Punisher run right now is pretty darn good. Probably is my #1 Punisher book that I keep going back to. It's currently on loan to my buddy. That is definitely one I don't ever see myself selling. That's easily one that I crack open a couple times a year. Next up is an extremely recent entry onto this list, and it's this guy, DCCeased. I only have read this first main book, which was the first 6 issues, and DCCeased the Unkillables. I actually haven't read the sequels yet for a book I love so much. That's pretty weird. A perversion of the anti-life equation has taken over Earth, and it acts so fast. It's honestly like one of my favorite zombie stories of all time. And I love Marvel zombies, and I think this one topped it really quickly and really recently. So can't wait for them to do an omnibus format when that's all said and done. I'm loving DCCeased. Let's do a quick word from our sponsor, Dynamite Comics. Some more exciting news from the Dynamite land. Cover artist Shannon Mayer, who specializes in outrageously sexy and gorgeous covers, like my personal favorite, this Catwoman cover, is now for the first time ever doing interior work. Shannon makes his writing and interior art debut with this fiendish tale, Siren's Gate #1. Follow the link to get your copy. And also, pick up your copy of Garbage Pail Kids Origins #1, available October 5th. I massively underestimated the popularity of this, as it's on track to be their bestseller this month. Get your copy while you still can, also at this link. Daredevil Yellow. There's a couple of those Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale ones that easily work really well. The Spider-Man one's really good. The one that I continue to think about, though, is Daredevil Yellow. Although, if we're being honest, one of the ways you might want to read this is the collected version that mentions all those other stories, the Captain America, the Hulk, the Spider-Man, and the Daredevil. It's no secret that I love Jeff Loeb. Tim Sale's art is not for everyone, but I think especially after his very unfortunate recent passing, it's my hope that a lot of people appreciate it even more. One of the things I liked about it is the lighter tone, because it's so funny. Daredevil, I love being such a dark character. Daredevil, Blade, Ghost Rider are kind of the darker side of the Marvel world of things. But I like when a brighter, almost comedy-esque story comes along in one of those titles, because it's a nice change of pace. And this is definitely that. Next up is the Injustice Omnibus, another Tom Taylor entry and another pretty recent run here. Tom Taylor seems to have a knack for non-canon DC epic spanning stories. Injustice is no slouch. I actually put this as my favorite Justice League story of all time in an earlier video. But yeah, I've read that 4 times through now. I do have the other second omnibus as well. A must-read. Not only if you want to understand the Justice League members, because he gets their nuances really well, but if you want something a little against the grain. So this is a little bit of everything. It is not canon. This is almost like a giant Elseworld story where Superman becomes a dictator. And it's fantastic. Next up is Hawkeye by Matt Fraction and David Aja. The Hawkeye show, I think, in my eyes, was a solid 7 out of 10, maybe an 8 out of 10. I liked it. I didn't think it was amazing, but I certainly think it was one of the better ones. One of the things I did like about the show is it borrowed some of those elements from the Matt Fraction Hawkeye run. Now, this was an award-winning run. Unbelievable new ways to approach narrative. It was able to bring life to an otherwise pretty under-recognized Avengers member. And with us already talking about Punisher, Daredevil, Hawkeye, I think it's clear that when it comes to Marvel, I just love these slightly lesser superheroes. I like the B-Team, I like the B-Squad for sure. If you want the best stories that encompass not the main Captain America, Spider-Man, guys like that, this Hawkeye run is an absolute must-read, and I really recommend you getting it. You'll probably find yourself cracking it open a few times out of the year. Next up is one I've read to death since I was a child, Batman Vampire, which collects Batman Red Rain, Crimson Mist, and the other one that I can never remember the name of. Anyway, all 3 Kelly Jones Batman books. It's collected in this Batman Vampire, but also there's a lot of different printings of this, like Elseworlds, Batman stories, I know it's in there. This is ridiculously good. This book was a game changer for me. Impacted my art style so significantly. This really propelled me into the more darker side that was the 90s stuff from DC and Vertigo. There's just always a special place in my heart for that. One of a kind. I've already mentioned zombies a couple times, so vampires aren't that far off. This was just so original, but also paid such close attention to vampire lore. This is just an uber satisfying read. Next up, we got the Geoff Johns Green Lantern Omnibus. This is actually just book 1 of 2 of 3. There's 3 omnibuses, and I also recommend you get the Blackest Night and Brightest Day omnibus to go with it. The Geoff Johns Green Lantern run is comic books at their best. He managed to do an entire run that didn't lose traction at any point in time, and it brought life to new characters. It changed the lore. It impacted all of DC Comics as a whole. The quality of this later 2000s run was so ridiculous and still a little bit unparalleled. I think it's Geoff Johns' best work, and that's saying something because he's done quite a lot for us over the years. This is the winner though. Grab this, and if you don't want to, you can always find YouTube channels that do a full accounting of this story. Believe it or not, despite the fact that it's about that much worth of comics, I read that every year without rest. Next up, for a very different reason, you guys know how much I love Spider-Man. Did a whole video talking about how I love Ultimate Spider-Man. This is the run that after track practice and cross-country in middle school, I would go to the library where these books were pretty much brand new and they've just gotten them in, and I was so excited to read all the trade paperbacks of this. This particular run is actually omnibus height, and there's like 10 or 12 or 13 volumes, and I have the whole thing. And that was apparently a giant financially savvy purchase because people sell that whole lot for like $1,000. It's just nuts. I would never sell it though because I read it so damn much. I just reread it this past year. I usually like reading it up to the point where Bagley dropped out, but honestly it carries on all the way to the end really well. I like the whole death arc and everything there. It's just fantastic. I'm just showing you book 1 here, but yeah, there's a lot of them. And they're killer. They're totally awesome. Next is the complete Walking Dead. I have the entire hardcover omnibus, and there's a cool story about this. I always saw these in the shops, and I always thought, you know what, I'm not going to be able to get that. Too expensive. And then I went to a yard sale, and I was able to pick up book 1 and 2 for something like $50 for both of them. 3 months later, I went to one of my local comic book shops, and they were having like a Black Friday sale, and then even gave additional percentages off. So I ended up getting this whole kind of hard to own, ridiculous hardcover set. This is the final one. I think this is 8, yeah, for a steal. A couple of the ones I have are actually signed by Adlard and Kirkman. That's pretty nuts. So I don't think I'd ever be able to sell that. That's just too killer. I love Walking Dead as the comics. I used to love it as a show. I think part of me still does, but I think the comics are the winner in terms of which one is better. I wanted to give you a couple honorable mentions before we get into our number 1. We got The Death of Captain Marvel by Jim Starlin. How about Batman Nightfall, the deluxe omnibus that collected everything all the way up until Night's End. Tom King's Mr. Miracle. New Avengers number 1 called Breakout by Bendis. Absolute Edition of New Frontier by Darwin Cook, The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, Volume 1, Squirrel Power. And last but not least, and ironically, the one I've chosen is still in its original shrink wrap. I am in love with Sandman. I mentioned in this video that I fell in love with the darker side of DC, so all the Vertigo stuff. I have read Sandman to death in every format that's possibly existed for it. The latest one I've got is this epic, oversized hardcover Absolute Edition, where I have the whole run that's actually sitting behind me. I have yet to read it in this format, which is interesting. I still read it on the previous formats that I have. However, I don't think I'd ever be able to sell this because it is one of my favorite genre-defining, personal-defining stories I've ever read in the medium as a whole. I wouldn't ever be able to get rid of it. This is one I'd want my kids to read when they're maybe a little older. Once I have kids, that would definitely be one of them. Anyway, guys, my challenge to you is why don't you give me your top 3 comics that you would never be able to part with? As always, guys, keep on hunting, keep on reading. See you next time.